you remember, I said one girl.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
It was a big deal because she didn't show up and I didn't write any.
Hello, we're going to begin. Thank you, everybody, if I could have your attention. Okay, hello. Welcome. Welcome back to many of you to what is, for this academic year, the first in our visiting lecture series here in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau. And welcome also to those of you who have not attended any of these events before. I see quite a few people in this room, many new faces, in addition to some old. So very nice to see you all here. Today, for this opening session of the lecture series, we are joined by Dr. James Chambers, who is visiting us from Hegel University, where he is a lecturer in philosophy and from which he also received his doctoral degree in philosophy, to my knowledge. Dr. James Chambers is an expert on a number of philosophical figures and within a number of philosophical traditions, having worked on the philosophies of figures such as Hegel, Marx, Lao Tzu in interdisciplinary ways. He's produced a number of works, chief among them, a book by the title Marx and Lao Tzu, a dialectical synthesis, published just last year with Palgrave Macmillan, alongside numerous articles, too numerous, in fact, to name all of them. However, one of them has a title displayed before you at this very moment. The title of this presentation today is the same as an article that was recently published. This is titled The Dialectics of Freedom in Ode on a Grecian Urn, Keats, Hegel, and Marx. Before I hand things over to Dr. James Chambers, I do just want to mention a couple ordinary procedural things. First, as you know, this will be an academic presentation by our guest speaker, after which there will be an open Q&A. So do try to think of questions and comments you might share with our speaker when the time comes. And I should also note, since some of you are new here, afterwards we will be having a reception period downstairs in this building in the Port Club room. It's a very fancy looking room, fairly hard to miss, frankly. And at any rate, you will see some of the very same people in this room there. So I do hope you will join us in a more informal capacity in the Port Club after the event. Okay, I think that's enough preliminary. Without further ado, if we could all come together in welcoming our visiting speaker, I will pass things along.
I think I should have a big microphone closer. Right. So I think I should maybe correct Ben at the beginning when he said, I published too many articles to mention. I think what he meant was the titles of my articles are too long to mention, which is a slightly different thing. So in this lecture, I am going to read a poem with you, and I'm going to try and explain it in a dialectical way. And I'm going to use the dialectical philosophies or theories of Hegel and Marx to present opposed readings. And then I'm going to try and give a synthesis from Keats at the end. Probably won't have enough time to do that synthesis because that's quite hard. But anyway, the idea is I will start with a kind of an analysis of this poem from a Hegelian perspective. It's not Hegel reading it, because he didn't. It's a Hegelian perspective. So I'm using sort of interpretive elements from Hegel, and I'm putting them into a reading of this poem. And it's going to come out with a certain distinctive sort of interpretation or meaning or sort of agenda to it. And then I'm going to oppose that reading with a kind of a Marxian refutation, or at least coming at it from a different angle. Okay, and it's going to kind of keep some things from Hegel, and it's going to, but mainly just sort of disagree. But I'm not going to be dunking on Hegel. He's kind of the Marxian reading is going to kind of change the topic of it, and then I'm going to try and put them both together with Keats, hopefully, as we go on. So, Dialectics of Freedom in Ode on a Grecian Urn, Keats, Hegel, Marx. The central question of this poem is, what is beauty? Wouldn't it be great if at the end of this lecture, we all knew exactly what beauty was? Yeah, well, I'm not offering that. But this poem is addressing that question. It's a very important question. And it's the central driving issue of this poem. And it's a central driving question for Hegel and Marx's philosophy as well. And so actually, this is one of the reasons why talking about this particular poem is so good, because for explaining Hegel and Marx, which is really what I'm trying to do. I'm using it as material for explaining Hegel and Marx, really. It's such a good piece of material because this is kind of an under-discussed area of Marx and Hegel research, particularly Marx. And I want, through talking about this poem, it's going to come, hopefully, to your realization just how central this sort of, the aesthetic element is in their philosophies or in their doctrines. So let's just hazard some some little brief little answers to this question of what we might consider beauty to be, specifically in terms of art, not necessarily natural beauty, because Hegel's got a funny view about that. So we might say beauty is the humanization of nature. I think Hegel and Marx would agree that beauty is the humanization of nature. It is when we take natural forms and we sort of impose human rules upon them, we make it into something we recognize or bring it closer to us. Okay, I think particularly Hegel is quite strongly associated with this kind of reading, although you wouldn't say humanization. I suppose it would be something about spirit. And then we could then say beauty is human freedom. Beauty is an act of freedom. This is, I think, a really central element of Marxian aesthetics, that it is to engage in artwork or to appreciate the beautiful is an act of freedom itself with no substitutes. Whereas I think for Hegel, he would sort of subordinate it to a deeper philosophical truth. And then we might say, and this is perhaps the vaguest and least helpful, but I'm going to try and say that it embraces both of these two, that beauty is wonder, maybe wonder at a mystery. And I'm going to use Keats, hopefully, to bring that home. Another way of looking at this is through the idea of transcendence. So in artwork, spirit is transcending itself by improving itself, by finding what stage it's at and then getting better at what it was doing or thinking anew about itself to break through the older boundaries of thought that it had. Okay, maybe that's a Hegelian sort of reading. Oh, and it's also kind of transcending individual physical objects to see the deeper truth. What's the meaning of this work of art? It's not present in the actual physicality or the sensuousness of the thing in question. So that's a kind of a transcendent reading. I'm going to try and make that transcendent element is going to be very strong when I do the Hegelian analysis of the poem. And then you could say kind of the opposite is in immanence, which is more a Marxian sort of led reading, whereby abstract ideas or fears or hopes or dreams that we might have about ourselves and about our world are brought down to earth and made so that we recognize them by putting human forms on them, or at least seeing it in the context of human society. This is kind of a Marxian sort of led sort of interpretation here, which is opposed to the Hegelian one. And then again, I can mention the basis of both of these kind of readings in mystery. And I'll just leave it there and I'll see how I can unveil that to you, right? So if you don't know who these two guys are, you might be in the wrong room. You will not be forgiven for not knowing who these two guys are. You might not know who this guy is, and that's all right. That's I don't know much about him either, but that's John Keats. Okay, and he was a poet, roughly contemporary with Hegel and Marx, and one of, they call him one of the big six British Romantic poets. I suppose I'm a bit biased. I'd say he's the best, but I'm not really an expert on Keats. And I kind of do more Hegel and Marx. This poem sort of spoke to me, and that's why I'm sort of talking about it. So be warned if you ask me Keats questions. As you can see, he had a rather short life. He had a short, rather tragic life, but he managed to fill it with quite a lot of quite good poems. And this, I would say, obviously I'm biased, but I would say this is probably his best one. Somebody said, and I can't find who it was who said, I read it and then I lost the quote. Somebody said, it's one of the most, if not the most written about poem in the English language. It's not the most popular and not necessarily the most well-known, but people who are writing articles, they really like writing about this one. Why do they like it so much? Well, I think obviously it's the broadness of the themes. The particular question, what is beauty, is of a central interest to anybody who's doing anything remotely to do with aesthetics, anybody who's doing about art or literature as well, because I mean, it's a confrontation, this poem. It's between a physical work of art, plastic art, sculpture, and literature. So you get this kind of cross-discipline stuff going on. And of course, it's ruminating about ancient Greece and modern romantic civilization sort of encountering ancient Greek art and asking what's beautiful about that. And so then it becomes, because, you know, ancient Greek art is at the root, or ancient Greek civilization is at the root of Western civilization, it becomes a comment on Western civilization's aesthetic sensibilities in general, and even its religion. So there's a lot going on in this poem, basically, and that's why it's so popular. Although I didn't really need to justify it to you. I mean, it's just really well known. If you're going to study literature, English literature, sooner or later, you're going to encounter this poem. So you may as well encounter it in this extremely convoluted way that I'm going to do. Right. So the question is, what's a Greek urn? And the answer is, of course, it depends upon the job. That's a joke. It's not a good joke, but it's an obligatory joke that you have to tell whenever you give a lecture about this poem. Okay, what's a Greek urn? You know, it doesn't matter. So what's a Greek urn? Yeah, let's all just pretend. But anyway, it's not a good joke, so that's fine. But it's an old one. Yeah, yeah. I just had to say it. I don't think I had a choice. I had to put that in at some point. And my real question is, what is Keats thinking about with this urn? All right. So this has often been said to be what Keats was thinking about, because he saw this pot, our Roman thing, and he saw it in an art book, and he liked it, and he drew a copy, and it's pretty good. I think not bad. Yeah. So people think, well, maybe that inspired him to write this poem. This was the shape he had in his mind. It's got some ancient Greek gods posing on it. It's got Artemis. It's got Apollo. I'm not going to say which is which. I'm not sure. And it's got Hermes and others, right? So maybe that's what gave him the idea. However, that's not what we usually think of when we think of ancient Greek pottery. I mean, that's Roman anyway. I mean, it's made by a Greek, but it's Roman. We think of this around 400 BC, this kind of stuff. The ancient Greeks are famous for this, and it's all over the Mediterranean now. They exported it and traded it. This kind of brown, red, black, white, yellow shapes, and it's got characters on it, and they're usually performing some scene from ancient Greek mythology. They're doing an ancient Greek myth. And then, you know, Hercules, for example, you know, that sort of stuff. And then we got these sort of abstract flowery things going on the top. So I imagine when Keats wrote this poem, he thought a lot of people were thinking about this kind of shape, and they had that in their mind. However, in Keats's day, called neoclassical movement in art, this is kind of how art was, ancient Greek art was popularly consumed in sculpture. And in Western Europe, particularly in my country, this is called jasperware, I believe. And I've got some of that in my mum's house. So it's all over the place. And yeah, it can be pretty cheap now. There was cheap ones, expensive ones. Keats saw loads of these. And obviously this must have been in his head as well. So keep these shapes in mind when I talk about this urn. The ode consists of 5 stanzas, which are describing 3 scenes, that is 3 pictures going on there. And then there's a little epigram, which is a bit of text written at the bottom of the pot, which says something clever. And the ancient Greeks like doing that with their artworks. They often had them write something on there and says, it says this, you know, know thyself, which was written on the gate, wasn't it, of the Oracle of Delphi. It's just a thing that they did. So it's not such a daft idea that he would do this. First scene is, it's a wild party. It's a drunken party. And the narrator gets excited and he doesn't know who's who and he doesn't know what's what. So that's what's going on. The first stanza describing the first scene. Second scene, the narrator's got a much better idea what's going on. He's no longer interested in who's who and where are they. He knows who they are as kind of general ideas. They're lovers. And he's able to identify them as lovers. And then the last scene is a cow sacrifice. And yeah, and that's the thing that the ancient Greeks did in their religion. They would sacrifice animals, and particularly cows. And they didn't mind depicting it in their artworks, as you can see. And so he then uses that to discuss death in general, which is kind of the whole purpose of the urn, because urns, this word urn, when we think of urns in English, it's a funereal object, either to contain the ashes of the dead, or they might put things related to the ceremony, the funeral ceremony in there, like wine or incense or something. Then we've got the epigram. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. Oh, wow, it's like a formula, it's a definition. Oh, that's what beauty is, it's truth. Oh, it's easy, now we know. So, yeah, it's not so obvious. But anyway, so that's the basic structure of the poem. It's kind of straightforward, isn't it? Right, now I'm going to make it a bit confusing. It's an ode. And what are odes like? Well, I'm going to say that they're kind of dialectical. That's what I'm going to say. There is a superficial correspondence between a Pindaric ode, which made famous by Pindar, and dialectics, okay? And it's this. A Pindaric ode usually would celebrate an event like a sporting victory in the Pan-Hellenic Games, like the Olympian Games or the Olympic Games, or the Pythian Games. I think they were first. And then, or a city, or a hero, somebody who died, right? And he was celebrating the thing. And this poem is celebrating an urn. And yeah, and it's about ancient Greece, and this is a very famous form of Greek poetry, so it kind of makes sense, you know, to make this sort of combination. But I think there's more to it than that. So these poems were performed. A group of people would come on, and they would sort of sing it, I think, to music, and then it would go off. It was like a performance. It was like a song. And with the strophe, the chorus that comes on singing it, they move from east to west on the stage. And they describe something in exciting terms, passionate terms, emotional terms, often very positive emotions in here. This is followed by the antistrophe, where the chorus is now moving from west to east. So it is physically an opposite movement in this. And in that, the chorus is now, the tone of it changes. It's an opposed tone. It's a sad, melancholy, slow sort of tone to the poem. Not necessarily contradicting what was said before, but the emotions are kind of opposed to them. And then that's followed by an epode, which is kind of trying to put these two together, these two opposite paths. Now, this crudely corresponds to an epistemic model, which was made famous by Fichte, the old thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing. Yeah, where we start with a model of learning whereby we posit a thesis, right? And we say A, this is how things are, A, and then we will deny it and put forward the opposed principle, and we'll say not A. And then we'll have a synthesis where we're trying to put A and not A together. And that synthesis then will become a new thesis, and so on and so forth. Now, Hegel doesn't like that model, although he uses something similar to it. He doesn't like it. Hegel believes that that model is too abstract, which is something coming from Hegel. He thinks it's too abstract because it doesn't have any specific content of actual learning. So I'm going to try and use a model which he does kind of use a bit in the science of logic. And that is this model of abstract analysis and conceptualization reason, right? And I'll use a medical or biological sort of example. We start off with an abstract idea, let's say the human body. You come to me and you say, oh, I got toothache. And all I'm able to do is say, oh, well, there's something wrong with your body. Not very useful, but it is the ability to identify the thing that is in question. I can see a body here, right? It's a broad whole without any content. Next comes analysis, where we realize that this whole is composed of parts, and all these parts are doing different jobs. So we might say the eye is seeing, the nose is smelling, mouth is talking, and then when you come to me and you say, you know, your tooth aches, I can say, oh yeah, there's a problem with your tooth. It's not just your body as such. I'm now able to identify parts. It's a whole composed of different parts. That's kind of what analysis is going on. And the final stage, concrete or conceptualization, which applies reason, is when we're putting all those parts together and we see that they are working in unison in a single system to do a shared job. They're organized. We organize these different parts. We don't think of these parts as all disparate doing their own thing. They're all working together to make a human. And I think that's the model of the human nervous system. I'm not sure. But anyway, the idea is they're all together. And this is a concrete idea, and that's an abstract idea. Yeah, there's a lot more medical information in this than there is in that. Let's start analysing the poem now. I've done enough about the dialectical method, and I'm not going to say much about every stanza because it's quite long, isn't it? For our purposes. Well, let's just start with this rather strange beginning. Unravished bride of quietness, foster child of silence. It's not directly translated in the Chinese. I'm not criticizing the translator, who has a great fidelity to aesthetics, but it's not word for word, okay? And I'm going to be analysing this English poem. So, unravished, let's say that's a metaphor for unanalyzed. It's not been picked apart and looked at and looked through. And bride of quietness, foster child of silence. Well, it's a trope-filled scenes, and they're of different sort of representatives of ancient Greek art. And every ancient Greek artifact, in a way, is a representative of the whole culture of ancient Greek art, but more so in this poem, where the narrator is addressing the urn as such. And in this poem, he's seeing this bride of quietness, foster child of silence, as well, it's like a concrete universal. It's, or we might say better, an archetype or a paradigm, a representative of ancient Greek art in general. And it's been fostered by modern Britain, right? Because it was in ancient Greece and it's been dug up and it's been taken to Britain, right? So we have one civilization, kind of, ancient Greece, maybe the mother, the biological mother, and it's been fostered by Britain. So that's the movement of slow time that's got it to where it is. So the Hegelian reading, as it starts off well, because it already gets to see the universal in the individual, which is always a nice thing to do when you're analysing things from a Hegelian perspective. Right, unfortunately, I've only just got started, but this is the worst line for a Hegelian reading, and it's a big obstacle, I'm afraid. It almost throws the whole idea of Hegelian reading into doubt, because it says that this urn and the story on it is more beautiful, more flowery, more complete than anything we can say, anything the narrator can say. So it's kind of like, the plastic art, the statue, is better than my words. Now, that's very difficult for a Hegelian reading to stomach, because Hegel was of the view, I think he agreed with Aristotle, that poetry is the highest form of art, because at its best, it gets really close to philosophy. It's taking concepts and purifying them, taking away the sensuous elements which may mislead it, so that you almost get to analyze language itself or logic itself. So poetry's better than physical art. So maybe somebody say, oh, they could say, maybe this is an expression of the narrator, sort of he's expressing his doubts, which is subjectivity, which is a higher stage of spirit. But Hegel wouldn't like that either, because that would kind of mean that the poem's not really true and it's mistaken about itself. And Hegel really doesn't like that. Hegel doesn't like irony or falseness in art. And this poem, I'm going to try and read it as true, because that's where Hegel thinks beauty lies. So it wouldn't be a very good idea for a Hegelian aesthetics, really, to just take that without qualifying it. There is a way out for a Hegelian reading, and that would be to see ancient Greek plastic art, as Hegel sees it, as the perfection of what you might call absolute beauty, well, what Hegel calls absolute beauty, which is beauty for the ancient Greek mind as communicating the freedom of humans over objective conditions, objective limiting conditions, such as physical ailments, blemishes, and suffering, right? Yeah, the ancient Greeks were best at making the supermen. They were best at doing that, because that was the level of their conception of beauty. That means they were able to make things that looked pleasing to the eye for us. Now, Hegel says, and I think this is true for the history of art, that the next stage of the history of art was self-critical, and it sort of had a focus on trying to show subjectivity or consciousness overcoming these weaknesses, these blemishes. That is, it would try and show the limitedness, the finiteness, the suffering of the human individual, and then it would try and represent spirit as somehow conquering that. And the best examples we have in art that Hegel loved are the crucifixion scenes of Jesus. And we've got to somehow paint in the face of Jesus, overcoming that suffering of his finitude, that he's going to die. And we've got to make that somehow look good. And of course, it's ugly. And it's an inherently disgusting thing to depict somebody being cruelly murdered, right? But that's a higher stage in art. So we can kind of say ancient Greek art is sweeter than modern art, right? In that kind of really, really qualified sense, Hegel would be able to sort of get out of that little trap there. However, Hegel liked describing his gods in ancient Greek art when he was at its best in states of repose, in perfect comfort, like Zeus here, really calm and relaxed, not straining himself and struggling against physical conditions. That's the best of ancient Greek art, but that's not really what's being described down here. We've got a pursuit. There's a chase going on. A woman is being chased by some men. And actually, the scene seems a little bit closer to the rape of Persephone, we might say. This statue here by a Renaissance artist. There probably were ancient Greek artists who did that. Well, I know there were. They did the same thing. This is a really good statue. So here it is. And it's describing a very important myth for the ancient Greeks that they used to explain the changes of the seasons. And in the myth, Hades comes up from the underworld. And well, let's start off with Persephone. Persephone's out picking flowers, and she's a goddess of vegetation. And then Hades likes the look of her, and he comes up from the underground, and this says the word rape, but he's not actually raping her. It comes from the Latin, I think, which just means to kidnap or capture. Anyway, and he drags her down to the underworld. Now, when that happens, Demeter, who is the mother of Persephone, she gets very sad. And when she's sad, everything gets cold, and all the plants stop growing, right? But then there's some kind of agreement, and Hades agrees to let Persephone come back to her mother for 6 months every year. So that's how we get cold 6 months when, Demeter's sad, and then we get a nice hot 6 months when Demeter's happy because she's back with her daughter. So that's what that story's about. Now, this story, which seems to be alluded to with this pursuit, I mean, on one reading, because it's very open-ended, right? But this story was an absolutely core element of the most famous of the ancient Greek mystery cults, the Eleusinian mystery, in which the participants sort of reenacted elements from this myth here. I mean, it was a secret myth. And actually, we do have a little bit more evidence that Keats is referring specifically to this one, because apparently the participant, and I'm not absolutely 100% sure of this, because the rites were secret, but I've read somewhere that the participants of these rites did ask questions during the ceremony, and then no one would answer them. So it was a thing that they did. Okay, and the narrator's doing it now. So we've got a mimesis of that event. That's me. That's all me, that connection. This questions and answers is connected with somebody else, someone I think called Swan, mentioned this. Maybe he was talking about the mystery cults. I'm just the one to say probably the Eleusinian mystery. So I'll take the credit there. Now, Hegel was very interested in the Eleusinian mystery, and he actually wrote his own Pindaric ode about it when he was young. Just a little baby Hegel, and he wrote a Pindaric ode about the ceremony of the Eleusinian mystery, in which he describes the participants as sacrificing an animal and then they're going up into that oceanic feeling, going up into the Godhead and joining with God somehow. And he describes it in rather, what would you say, ebullient terms. Yeah, why not? But then Hegel comes back to this Eleusinian mystery later in the Phenomenology of Spirit, and it appears in the chapter on sense certainty. And there he seems to be a bit more negative about what is learned in that, because he says really all the participants learn is the nullity of finite things, that you can bring things to an end, you can destroy them and you can make them part of yourself. Individual physical things come and go, and they don't really have any sort of deeper meaning than that. And Hegel thinks that ancient Greek religion got stuck on that level, which is shown when the participants can rise up to the Godhead, but they can't bring the Godhead down to them. They can't bring God down to the individual level, which is, of course, what Hegel thinks the Christians were able to do with the story of Jesus Christ, who has come back from the universal God and become one of us, so he can suffer like one of us. That doesn't really happen. Well, according to Hegel, that doesn't really happen in the Eleusinian mystery. So there's quite a rich sort of parallel of ideas going on here. Yeah, all these questions and this kind of unsatisfactory feeling that you get at the end of this scene, which is kind of reflected in Hegel's dissatisfaction with this incomplete religious ceremony. Now, in the next bit, looks a lot more Hegelian, this, unheard melodies, which are sweeter than ones you actually can hear, well, at least on a kind of Platonic reading of Hegel, which I'm kind of doing. So we got a complete tonal shift from the excitement and the drama of the first stanza to this calm and thoughtful bit in which the narrator is immediately thinking about music that you can't hear. So he's trying to go beyond the limits of sensation. Well, what is music that you can't hear? Keats, in another poem, I think Endymion, refers to music as the movement of the planets. Why? What's musical about this? Well, circular. There's a musical element in that, you know, beginning, middle, and end of tunes. But also it involves harmony, patterns, mathematics, and Keats thinks that this is kind of like music for the gods in a way. After all the planets are named after gods, right? So it's like they're playing music that you can't hear. So already when we're alluding to unheard music, we're already alluding to the eternal movements of the gods. He's gone from this very temporal scene, there's a chase scene going on, and we don't know how it ends, to this kind of thinking about eternity and things going on forever and cycles, and how does that work? Well, the reason why the narrator is able to sort of do this is because of the way in which, on a Hegelian reason, the way in which he is able to pick out the lovers. Because he's moved on from wanting to know in the first scene, he was saying, who are these people? Where are they? What are they doing? He stopped being confused about that. He actually understands who the lovers are in terms of what they mean as more kind of universal tropes. They are lovers and they're doing the love thing, being, well, I mean, they're being in love without this process coming to an end because they're frozen there in the image. So it's kind of like he's almost thinking of it as a sort of a concept of love. And these lovers are just kind of like, well, they're individual representatives of this universal idea. And he's using this ability to identify that to be able to move up to thinking about eternity itself. And this is depicted again through kind of talking about the sensuous, what actually happens in physical sense experience in negative terms. So, you know, the trees can't lose their leaves, and the lovers can never actually complete their kiss, and the woman can never get old. All of these things are frozen by the concept itself, which has kind of escaped temporal processes because it's not a sensed love. It's not two actual lovers. It's rather an idea about what love means, which of course is a central dialectical idea for Hegel, and especially the young Hegel. Yeah, he sees dialectics in terms of, I mean, he sees love as kind of a perfect model of dialectics in some of his earlier writings. And again, this sensuous idea of love is kind of critiqued with this repetition here of happy this, happy that, happy the other, everything's going on that's happy here. This is the only, I think it's the only scene which gets two stanzas about it. It's almost like the writer is trying to say, well, let's try and do a bit of eternity that you could see by making this bit long and almost torturing the reader with repetitions. This is why some people mocked the poem when it first came out, because they're like, he's not got much of a vocabulary, has he, with all of his happies? But he is actually making a point. He's criticizing the limits of physical art as you see it and look at it, right? And that corresponds to a criticism of late ancient Greek art and Roman art, which Hegel made, namely that it started to produce things that were merely pleasing to the eye, because they couldn't get beyond objective beauty, and these people have got no interiority, is Hegel's idea. They don't have any real subjective life. They started making art which, yeah, I mean, you've mastered the craft, she looks nice, but we're not wondering about what she thinks. We're not wondering anymore about what does this mean? And beauty has been lost here for Hegel. Yeah, he's, you know, Hegel loves ancient Greek art, but it's from a very specific kind of era. He likes it from around 400 BC, the Parthenon friezes, that kind of time. Which Keats actually saw, and it helped inspire him to write the poem. So now we're talking about the animal sacrifice scene. and the cow is being led to slaughter. And we get questions again. It's referring subtly, it's kind of a mimesis, it's referring back to what was going on in the first stanza. Who are these people? Where are they? What's going on? Right? That same thing happening again. And there, it's kind of referring back to the Eleusinian mystery, because that was all about the circularity of seasonal change. So the poem is circular, and it's a mimesis of a circularity which was inherent in a core element of ancient Greek religion. And this circle can also be shown through the fact that the animal sacrifice is depicted as the last scene in the poem, in the ode, but it's not necessarily the last on the urn. And so the idea is that in the Eleusinian mystery, the animal sacrifice happens first. Then there's the feast and the drunken chase and all the excitement and maybe the lovers. The feast happens first. First you kill the animal. I mean, we don't know much about the Eleusinian mystery, but we know that they wouldn't have anything to eat if they didn't kill the cow first. So that bit happens first. But it's happening at the end of this poem. Why is Keats putting it at the end? Well, the idea is that just like it's not a comic strip, this part, and it doesn't say 1, 2, 3, this is the order that you look at them. The poem itself is kind of implying you could rotate this poem and read it again. We can go round and round. So we've got a circular infinity again, which is being very subtly alluded to. At the same time, interestingly, that the narrator starts wanting to comment on death because the cow is going to die, and he's mentioning the beauty in that, and now he's also talking about, oh, what little town, the ancient Greeks that are dead and that they've gone and they've left us this behind. So yeah, I mean, so right, it gets what's going on with this circular view of eternity. It does correspond to a circular view of dialectical historical development through ancient Greece to modern times, which I'm going to just read off to you because I'm having trouble keeping this in my head. So this circular vision of eternity is complemented by Hegel's circular dialectic of phases of freedom in history. The dialectic begins with the Greek commitment to traditional foundational social institutions upon which freedom is dependent, such as family and the state. And the stage is negated by the subjective introspection of Christianity and the cult of the individual in the Enlightenment. Yeah, that's the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. It was shown in the Olympics. It's a Phrygian cat. Just bear that in mind. That's the logo. It's their Olympic logo, that little red thing. And anyway, of the French Revolution. Finally, the truth of the Greek stage of freedom is revived and reconciled with the Christian and Enlightenment stages in the rational reintegration of the individual free will in society through constitutional rights and state institutions. So from the Enlightenment, we get the rights that need to be enshrined in law. And from the ancient Greeks before that, we've got these institutions of family and state, and they're coming first. And in modern society, we're now able to put them together with an all-embracing state, as Hegel would say it, and rights for all the individuals. And we've sort of married them together. And the ancient Greeks have come back to us with the moderns. We've learned, we've taken it, we've had a synthesis of what was going on before. A bit like the cycle of seasonal change. I should add that I think the ancient Greeks didn't believe in spring and autumn. It was just they just had a dual. I think most of the ancients had this view. You just had summer, then winter, summer in Europe anyway. Not really important, but bear that in mind. Yeah, what little town? We're asking about the ancient Greek civilization. That has gone. It's not, this is important. This little town by river or seashore is not depicted on the pot itself. This is the narrator's work. He's thinking, where do you belong, Ern? Where do you come from? There's no picture of a town that's empty. He's thinking about that. So subjectivity, through a Hegelian reading, subjectivity is using this poem to express itself. It's using it to see what it can bring to meaning. And that's of central importance when we get to this kind of summing up stanza, which is talking about what all that meant. And it characterizes the urn as an Attic shape. Oh, Attic, Athens. Now we know where it comes from. That's a civilization that it comes from. So he's saying it's Greek. Well, he's saying it's Greek. It's from Athens. Why not? They made lots of pots there. Oh, Attic shape. Oh, circle. Circle. Oh, eternity. Must mean something, right? And then we go to cold pastoral. Interesting. Cold, the object is cold. That's where the coldness comes from. If you touch this pot, it will be cold on your fingers. Pastoral, where's that coming from? Well, this is a pastoral scene here, but it's only a pastoral scene because that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing some farmers, and look, they're not wearing any clothes because it's so hot. When you think of pastoral scenes, you think of warmth, the warmth of harvest, right? So this onomatopoeia is an onomatopoeia of the contraries of the physical sensed object, which is cold, and the meaning imposed by spirit, which is pastoral. Yeah. So we've got a unity of the finite and the infinite through spirit doing this little job thing that it does in a Hegelian reading. And then we get the old beauty is truth, truth, beauty. I hope it's obvious to you now what that means on a Hegelian reading, so I don't need to spell it out to you. But well, I'll do something. But anyway, what should I do? On a Hegelian reading, this truth beauty thing is this truth that I was talking about how spirit is able to create meanings and how we use this element of this ability to create meanings to transcend ourselves, to go beyond, which is why ancient Greece is lost, of course. This is why we're not making these pots anymore, because we don't do that anymore, because we don't think like that anymore, because of an internal dialectic, which has led us up to where we are now on a Hegelian reading. And that's kind of the truth that cold pastoral is kind of commenting on. And that the fact that this pastorality, this pastoralness, the bucolic scene is shared by the ancient Greeks and us, that we remember it. It's a continuous line of spirit development. Right, I've done a little bit there to help with that. Right, beauty, truth, truth, beauty. The problem with that whole reading that I gave you there is that Keats wouldn't like it, unfortunately, because yeah, I know, I should have said that at the beginning, but no, it wouldn't be dialectical then. So Keats didn't like it. Because he invested this whole poem with a central idea of his, which is called negative capability, which is when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact or reason. That's what Keats thinks is going to elicit the aesthetic experience. The experience of something as beautiful is kind of the acceptance of a sort of mystery. And you can see how that's not going to work with our Hegelian reading, which is trying to give us concrete answers for things. He wants to leave things open-ended. So Keats wrote about this little kind of definition of negative capability in the context of criticizing Coleridge's poems, because according to Keats, he's probably right. But anyway, according to Keats, Coleridge he was a bit of a German idealist. He read a lot of German idealists, and Keats thinks that at the end of his poems, Coleridge is always trying to force his readers to accept a conclusion. He wants to make you think a certain thing. He wants to give you the conclusions. He wants to spoon feed it to you, so you can't come up with any ideas of your own. And Keats thinks that that loses the aesthetic moment, which is caught when you just sort of accept this confrontation of a mysterious sort of other, right? Which sounds kind of spooky and mystical. I'm going to try and make it more clear, but we'll see what I can do. Now, yeah, this isn't going to work with Hegel, because Hegel's of the view. I mean, remember what I said about this, the equation here? Beauty is truth, truth, beauty, it's mutual, right? Then, whereas Hegel's going to say that there's more to truth than beauty. Now, I'm not going to read, in his lectures on aesthetics, this is one of the famous quotes. A lot of Hegel scholars are very critical of this. They say, oh, didn't really mean this. They try and sort of backpedal or get out of it. Some people say that Hegel actually never really said this, and somebody else wrote this, because it's lecture notes anyway, isn't it? So you can, maybe that happened. I'm old school, and I think he probably did say something like this, in which he's saying philosophy has kind of completed all the work that art could do, and art has kind of come to an end now. And we think of art in terms of the past. It's something that's lost to us, because now we've got philosophical truth. We have purified concepts from all images, and we can see how concepts themselves work. And that's where the real truth lies, because there the idea does not merely appear to sense, it's known. And so Hegel characterizes the beautiful as the pure appearance of the idea to sense. To sense, it means eyes, hand, fingers, looking, hearing, however art is appreciated emotionally and sensuously. And that's all beauty can do. But obviously the idea can be known without necessarily this beautiful, without this idea to sense thing going, I think. It doesn't have to be sensed and touched and felt. The point when you do get beautiful art, where the idea does appear to sense, it's only when the subject is already developed enough to be able to appreciate this philosophical truth and then sort of recollect it when he looks at the artwork and say, ah, yes, the artwork is bringing out this clever philosophical idea that I've got, that art couldn't have given me on its own, that I needed to do philosophy to get. Okay, I mean, that's the reading I'm coming across. It's controversial. Most people who write about Hegel and art will say that I'm wrong, but I'm not going to defend that reading either. I'm just throwing it out there because I'm dogmatic like that. But no, because it wouldn't make for such a good reading as the one I'm putting forward. It wouldn't be able to have this dialectical element to it anyway. It would have got stuck at the beginning with that, you know, flowery tale more beautiful than our rhyming. It would have been a pretty short article then. So here's a bit more about why Keats would disagree with Hegel. He criticizes philosophy, in which he says, philosophy will unweave a rainbow. Now, that's the title of a famous book by Richard Dawkins, in which I think Dawkins makes Keats into a bit of a straw man. But I mean, you know, he's got a case. It's not like Keats really fleshed out these ideas philosophically. But the kind of Keats reading that I'm going to come through with is going to say the sense in which Keats is complaining about philosophy or science unweaving the rainbow is an attitude which we may have to science do we have explained the rainbow. So we may think, after we know about sunlight and water droplets and all that, that the rainbow is now completely understood by us and it's just become a trivial thing. It's become a nothing almost. Yeah, it's not an extraordinary thing. It's just like anything else that comes and goes. And it's just stuff. And we become indifferent to it. It's transparent to us. We don't really see the beauty in it. That's an attitude we can have to science. It's not necessarily what science is. I mean, it's a poem, so Keats isn't really qualifying that, but this is a more useful reading of Keats, because I think Keats would agree with Einstein when Einstein said, the most beautiful things we can experience is the mysterious. I mean, that's Keats, right? So that's the way I'm reading Keats. So I mean, if this comes through from science, then you know, more the better for science, I think, on a Keatsian reading. Keats is just not going to be happy with a Hegelian model of we have the final answer now. We know about rainbows, and what's more important is this idea, this logical idea. So the Hegelian reading was a bit of had problems, right? So let's move on to a Marxian reading. Now, Marx has kind of a theory of aesthetics, and it comes across, he's not systematic with it, and he doesn't make a special work of it, but yeah, he writes things about art. I mean, this is from a very early Marx, when he was very young. He was thinking about art here. They're both, Marx and Hegel were obsessed with ancient Greece, by the way. Marx sees art in this little passage as kind of being like ideological cookery, right? So with cookery, we take base matter, we take plant matter, biological matter, we take plants, animals, kill them, cook them, mix them, and add. I mean, I don't know much about cooking, but I imagine these things are involved. And they make it so it's nice and tasty, and we can enjoy it, and it becomes more like humans, right? Like the way we like it. Now, Marx is kind of saying, yeah, art's kind of like that too, but it's not working with dead animals and plants. It's working with the kind of the hopes, the fears, the dreams, the ideas that we have about our world and our society and our place in it. These confused ideas we have, which form an ideology, can be subjected to a kind of critique through art. When we take these alien and perhaps frightening forms and we impose human rules of beauty on them, they become not necessarily better known to us. It's not necessarily the fact that we know these things more now. Maybe we're more deluded than we were, but we're more at home with them. We're more familiar with them. We're more comfortable using them. We don't have this fear and reverence of them the same way you might do with a wild boar that's running at you. You might be a bit scared of that, and you're not so scared of it when it's on your plate. It's that same sort of, yeah, is it? Yeah, it's that same sort of thing, right? You know, you're not so scared of these gods up in heaven that who knows what they're going to do next. And you've just got to make sacrifices to keep them quiet. No, not to keep them quiet, to keep them happy so they don't hurt you. and you're not worried and scared of them. You've brought them down to earth, and you've made them so they're things that you can see and that you can point at. Yeah. So let's read this poem again from, I don't know, yeah, you thought you'd got rid of it, but no, I'll be much quicker. This Marxian, it will be much quicker. So we've got this, the first stanza again, and we've got this description of confusion here. The narrator is confused, and this is actually a rare depiction of the Eleusinian mystery. It looks pretty confusing, right? And so, in making this an object of art, this religious rite, which was supposed to be kept secret, we expose it as inherently confusing. It's mystifying. It's odd. It's what's going on. That's what's happening. This is the confusion that is being depicted by the narrator here. He's showing the people, I mean, moderns looking back, but an ancient Greek who's making a work like that is also showing there's something inherently confused about religion, this kind of religion, and this kind of sacrifice. What's going on here, you know? Just accept what you see. Chaos. It's supposed to mean something. And an ancient Greek religion presented itself as being absolutely, you know, authoritative and acceptable and just the natural way things should be. But kind of bizarre when you start drawing it down, right? I want you to keep this idea in mind. Deities or mortals or both. The implication here is that when we're making superhuman gods, they are nevertheless human. In giving them a human form, we've kind of brought them down to a human level. And the narrator doesn't know which is which. That's important. That's what art can do. It can bring down an abstract idea like a god, or, oh, you only see Zeus when he starts throwing lightning at us, to, no, there he is. It's that statue there. He's a good looking guy. You know, you've brought him down to our level now. So bear that in mind. I'm going to talk about that again. Right, see, getting a bit quicker now. What am I talking about here? Oh, yes, winning near. Winning near without actually achieving the goal. Okay, the lovers are winning near. They're not actually going to do something. And this corresponds to a way in which Marx, I think in the German ideology, characterized ancient Greece as falling out of time. But he didn't qualify or explain it very much. So I'll do that for you. In which he says, ancient Greek art it has a timeless quality. Whence comes this timeless quality? Well, you can see it partly in this little line here, in which it talks about piping to the spirit, ditties of no tune. The narrator is enjoying and celebrating the fact that he can't actually hear the music. This music cannot be bought and sold. It is free from the tyranny of commercial exchange. Free, in fact, in a way which modern art cannot be. We don't make art now just for its own sake. Well, maybe some people do, but art as it is known today is consumed. It is bought and sold. The narrator is able to, his poem was bought and sold. This narrator he's actually able to enjoy the loss of this poem by not being able to actually, of this tune, by not actually being able to hear it. That's better to him than actually hearing it, because then it will be for him. He can't tell the player to do anything. So this is another element of Marx's theory of art, that it's the freest really form of action you can take, because it's not really done for anybody else, and it's done for its own sake. It has no substitute, and we only do art because we want to do art. That's a truly free act, which the narrator is able to enjoy with this line here. And yeah, the winning here is getting away from goals, right? Now, yes, and this way the songs can be forever new, because you never actually hear them. They don't come, they don't come to an end. Now, Marx, we could say from a Marxian reading that ancient Greek art, it falls out of time because it looks to the future, it's utopian, and it looks to the past. So it looks to the future in the sense that the ancient Greeks considered their gods as personifications of natural forces, and natural forces were an extension of their personalities and emotions. So lightning happens because Zeus feels a certain way, and Apollo is doing things with the sun. It's what he wants to do. So they're now imagining humans so harmonized with nature as to treat nature as a natural extension of themselves. And this is a utopian ideal which Marx believes we're called upon to produce in socialism, this greater and greater harmony with each other and with nature, in which we become nature and nature becomes part of us. So that's looking way ahead from beyond what the ancient Greeks could imagine. And at the same time, it looks to the past, ancient Greek art, because these bodies here have only got so muscular as a result of physical labor. You don't get muscles like that from watching TV or being an aristocrat and just hanging around and letting other people do your work. They have physical forms that are idealized by the Attic peasant, or that is, when the republican city-states were established in ancient Greece, one of the first actions that they did were kind of reactionary in that they were looking to act to the past, because they were trying to, some of the most important laws they bring in is the end of debt slavery, which happened in the Han Dynasty in China. So with the debt bondage, the idea was that the poorer peasants, often they would fall short at the end of the year and they would have to borrow off the rich landlords. And after a time, the rich landlord said, well, there's no way you're going to pay this off unless you just work for me. And that was how they became slaves. So the first laws they enacted were kind of abolishing that debt bondage, getting rid of all the debts. So it's looking to the past to create a society of masterless freedom, which again, it's an element of Marx's conception of freedom. You're not working for anybody. Marx thinks that ancient Greek societies at their best were composed of independent Attic peasants working for themselves, with maybe a slave as an assistant or a helper or a partner. And yeah, I know this is what Marx is saying about the best times of ancient Greek history, not necessarily the majority of it. So this is encapsulated in these statues, which have got both the past and the future in them. Now we're talking about death and the death of ancient Greek civilization. How is this coming about? Well, I can talk about how, from a Marxian perspective, in terms of the depiction of a animal sacrifice, and in depicting it, in making it artistic, the ancient Greeks are empowering themselves over a frightening act, which is killing an animal, right? And they're moving beyond that, and they're not scared of it anymore because they've kind of made it beautiful, because you've got this cow, lowing to the skies, and they've made it look nice. And so you're not so scared of the blood and guts when they come out, is the idea, and what that means. And the other side going on is, what was over the sacrifice of the animal? Oh yeah, Marx believed, as I've said before, that the ancient Greek religion was a prejudice for the substantial. It was kind of worshipping rocks or worshipping natural things, and then saying, but there's another higher authority there, through which the ruling classes would then justify their rule by saying, and we're mirroring this higher supernatural power that it has over us. But once we can make statues and forms of these religious rites, and we bring them down to earth and make them human again, and so that we can understand them and we can see the dishonesty that was in the ancient Greek religion there, and it helps us overcome it, which is why, ancient Greek religion, from a Marxian reading, you might say, which is why ancient Greek religion did come to an end, because this mystical spiritual idea that they wanted to keep had to escape physical forms, had to escape its icons. And that's why you get a Jesus story with a God who you don't really know where he is, because you've got a Holy Spirit as well. It's a literal attempt to escape the physical forms that the ancient Greeks had perfected. Through their science as well, through their technique, they learned that they could master natural forces. And they didn't need to ask Zeus's permission to use things. They could actually just do it themselves. And so all of this is an inelimitable part of art as self-empowerment, as freedom itself, which has you can't get it from anywhere else. There's no idea to be learned. You have to make this to be able to appreciate this kind of art. Attic shape. Oh, yes. So I did talk about kind of the truth and the beauty there from a Marxian reading. I think this kind of self-empowerment thing and this immanence thing. So I'm kind of happy to leave it there. And now I'm just going to very, very briefly, this is like the end of it, try and tell you what Keats was up to with this kind of putting together of Hegel and Marx. We started with this humanization of nature. I did mention that. And then I talked about beauty being human freedom, particularly with the Marxian reading, this immanent sort of thing. And then I've mentioned beauty as wonder. What this poem is doing, it's an old attempt at the humanization of nature, which is the urn. That's the pot. It's been lost. And this loss replicates the mystery of nature as a prompt for the wonder of aesthetic consciousness. Humanization of nature through replication is art. So the poem attains a kind of derivative beauty. We're trying to have an aesthetic experience in our disenchanted times, like what the ancient Greeks maybe could do with their pots. And how do we do it? we do it by experiencing the loss of them. What they saw, we can't see. And this has a similar or the same content as the ancient Greek art or ancient Greek religion when it was at its most beautiful, insofar as it accepted this idea of explanatory terminus. So, other shot. Explanatory terminus. Terminus. So.
Establish a queue. As we normally go about things, we try to oscillate between in-person and potentially online questions. We're a pretty full room, though. I think I'll try to lend a measure of priority to those who are here in person. Anyway, if there's anybody who is eager to start us off. Okay, Alan, why don't you start? And I'll be routinely looking around to add people to the queue.
I'm just curious, according to Hegel, what's the difference between a beauty? Okay, according to Hegel, what would be the difference between beauty in poetry, which is kind of human creation, kind of a human expression of idea or emotion, and a beautiful object like a Greek urn?
Oh, right.
So is there any kind of hierarchy? One beauty is higher than the other, or they are the same thing?
Yeah, I think that Hegel just thinks beauty in poetry is higher than, although I wouldn't specify which particular poet Hegel would think is probably Goethe. I mean, he loves Goethe. But yeah, he just thinks he's better than physical art, I think, yeah, because it uses concepts one step removed from physical finite things which are limited and come to an end, and it's a one-sided way of experiencing art, I guess, or experiencing beauty, you might say. And they begin to be able to produce concepts which are talking about themselves, concepts analyzing themselves, as opposed to the concepts that we're going to have to export when we're looking at an object and saying that's beautiful. Yeah, they get to do it themselves in the writing. So yeah, I mean, it is Aristotle who says that the best, but the best poetry is better than philosophy, or it's truer than philosophy. It can be, because it can be more profound than philosophy. I don't think Hegel would go that far, because if you've ever read any Hegel, it's not really very poetic. You know, whatever else you might say about it, it can be. But I think sometimes when it is, especially in the aesthetics, maybe Hegel didn't write that bit. But, but you know, maybe that's mean of me. Yeah, he wrote poems. I mean, yeah. So I hope I've answered your question. Philosophy is better. Philosophy is really getting to truth, and you really know truth. Some philosophy, and you know, your aesthetic experience is going to be so much better. I mean, Hegel himself loved art, particularly ancient art, even though he says it's kind of lost, which almost seems contradictory to me. How can he, you know? So.
Another Keats is well known for his aesthetic view that actual art is more real than reality.
Yeah.
Like even in this poetry talk, you can't make a contrast between life, which is impermanent, can be miserable, and art is eternal. You know. And I remember when I studied British literature, we compare Keats' poetry with some other so-called romantic one like Shelley and Byron. And Keats was always single out as talk about this pure.
He's trying to go beyond all the time, isn't
he? Right, pure transcendence of poetry, which is absolutely different from the view, of course, from Plato's very skeptical view about poetry. You know,
yeah.
So
and yet it's strangely Platonic, isn't it? To get these pure.
I'm not familiar with the Hegel. I studied Hegel more, talk about his aesthetic about the tragedy. And Hegel talk about this kind of conflict of two equally valuable sayings. Talk about
yes.
Great tragedy. So I'm more familiar with that part. But this one, your Hegel reading is kind of a little bit unfamiliar to me.
Yeah, and it is so, maybe some would say it's a bit one-sided, maybe a bit Platonic in places. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair to him sometimes, but I figured it would make a better structure. It would be a better propedeutic it would have more, it would have better sort of educational, pedagogical qualities through this reading. But then, I mean, because Hegel is such a big thinker and he's so complex, I do think, and a lot of people who criticize his dialectical view would say this, that he often, without meaning to, will fall down on one side. I mean, then he will try and cover it up by then going on the other side and saying, because you've got to accept the contradiction. But I do think in the end, he does want to give a final answer. And when he does that, he is kind of going beyond, I don't know, a purely dialectic acceptation of a sort of a contradiction you can't get past, sort of thing. So I had that bias in my reading there.
I think Zeus wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I was really close to making that joke and I bit my tongue. But
Yeah.
I'm glad somebody did it.
He disagrees, eh?
Nobody in the chat online so far.
Yeah, that's the caprice of nature, which must have confronted the ancient Greeks as awe-inspiring, which now, as you see, we're relatively indifferent to it. So, oh, well, that's just happening. I mean, for them, it was frightening, but in their best artwork, the ancient Greeks managed to make it beautiful, which is a different feeling. It's like we're no longer just going to be scared. We're trying to take the fear out of awe. And that's how we're kind of approaching. I guess that's what to marvel is, or to wonder is. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to bite the bullet here. So we were talking about earlier you were speaking about the 6 great romantic poets in England.
Yeah, briefly.
Briefly. And we were approaching this element of like, oh, like you have to stand in awe of nature in some sense, and also try to humanize that. Maybe just can't fully be done. But I guess I want to say, like, after you end up with the French Revolution, we have Burke, and Burke's aesthetics is not this. It's very much a refutation of Romanticism. But he keeps this awe. He calls it like the sublime.
The sublime, yeah.
Can you speak on that for a bit?
Not much about Burke, I'm afraid.
No.
Yeah, I know he wrote a book about the sublime, and yeah, I know. Yeah, 18th century aesthetics it's got this big focus on the sublime from Kant and Burke and Hogarth as well. Yeah, the painter. Yeah, he talks about the sublime. It's all about curves with him. It's all about S-shaped curves. But yeah, would I be right in saying that with this new emphasis on the sublime, there's a kind of this mimesis idea of art is kind of being pushed into the background, and he's got a new kind of emphasis. Am I right there? Yeah. I mean, and I think there's a very strong mimetic element in this poem. I think, although he's not an Aristotelian, I don't know how sophisticated a philosopher Keats was. The best things about this poem are coming forth through a kind of mimesis, which of course is why poetry is attempting to, well, I mean, on a correspondence theory of truth, why we would think of art as a kind of mimesis, right? Because it's going to try and correspond to the truth or depict what the truth is. Yeah. Which again, Hegel's not big on that because he's got a kind of a theory of art more derived from Schiller as kind of art as a sort of an expression. But there's so much Aristotle in Hegel. You can't completely wash the Aristotle out of him anywhere, in my
And I also follow up with this idea about beauty as humanization of nature. Yeah, this is quite, of course, from today's viewpoint, very, anthropocentric view about what beauty is, right? You talk about humanization of nature. And I'm thinking along with the Chinese idea about aesthetics, I'm thinking about the 2 opposing examples. One would be, I don't know if you know that the Chinese long history really appreciates what we called very weird stones. I don't know how.
Yeah, I've heard these weird stones.
Really so-called, to many people really ugly stones.
Yeah, they don't look like anything. Yeah.
Right, but for maybe the Chinese and as a point, they have special, very beautiful in nature. So absolutely no any kind of a human kind of a handsomeness there.
I heard there was an emperor who collected these stones.
Right,
He
actually, I
bankrupted the
belong
dynasty
to
of.
collecting those kind of weird stuff. But the opposite one, I'm thinking along this notion of humanization of nature would be Chinese, what we call it bonsai.
Bonsai,
Bonsai in Japanese, bonsai in Chinese.
Oh, the plants, the
You know,
trees.
it's kind of twist, you know, like a mimetic of nature, but with a kind of human twist,
Ah, yeah.
right? So you see those kind of
Flower arranging and things.
right, the trees, whatever flower, but the arrangement in a kind of human thing, and that also considered as being beautiful, right? So I'm just thinking it's like, you know,
You're right. It does definitely count.
Right.
It clashes with Western civilization's conception of art, and that's why I sort of premised it all by saying this poem's a great piece of material for talking about Western civilization's aesthetics, because I mean, humanism is such a strong trend, such a strong theme in Western thought, and definitely dominant in the thought of Marx and Hegel. I would like to temper it in Marx, but he doesn't really help out with what he writes. So yeah, this is really kind of a clash of civilizations' aesthetics with this kind of opposed view. This ugly stones thing, for example, fascinates Westerners. They just didn't get what was beautiful about it. I still struggle with it. So yeah.
Forest stones you see in rocks around here.
Well, they just collect. You've seen it. The people put them on their table and things, like a bent sort of stone. It's a natural. They've not like chiseled it or anything. Yeah, and it looks odd. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's bad. Yeah, me personally, I struggle to understand it. I'm not saying it's wrong. Maybe it's great. I like things I don't understand, which is really convenient for me because that's like most things. So, it's almost everything, practically.
Pass the microphone.
I think you already answered my question. I was wondering, since you worked on Marx and Lao-Tzu, if you could also come up with a Lao-Tzu reading, but you basically already said probably not.
Oh, great! That's a relief. I'm glad you saw it there. Yeah. Yes, definitely. It would be in precisely what our colleague has said about this. Where's the non-human element of the aesthetic experience, which seems to be just completely sort of absent? Yeah, and yeah, it's almost like, I'd like to kind of see them as mirrors, really, and maybe we can't have one without the other. I mean, I alluded to it when I was talking about socialism being this idea about greater harmonization. I was careful not to say, which probably was closer to Marx's actual view, it's about controlling nature and imposing human rules on it and making it more, so it's our thing. Like the gods, and I don't think Keats would like that for a start, but I mean, I don't like it as an aesthetical theory. I think a better aesthetic ideal would be for harmonization, which is a very Chinese concept. To try and find a way to work with it, work through it, work with it, and not kind of impose our ends on it. We need to recognize our own separate ends as actually kind of belonging to or being part of nature or having its own nature. We can't kind of see it. We can't just like say there's this discontinuity between us and we're confronting this nature sort of thing. Not an absolute rupture anyway.
We do have a little bit more time. Yes, there's still somebody who would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Can I say something about else?
Others should feel free to raise a hand in the absence of their doing so. I think you can go ahead. So please.
Are you familiar with the work by a Chinese Taoist scholar, quite very famous one called Liu Xiaogan?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. He's written a lot on Zhao Deqing. And I think he might like this idea because one of his interpretation is that when he interprets Tao's view about 自然, of course, the first, the primary view is 自然 is actually means self-sowing, vis-a-vis other sowing. But then it expanded to also nature eventually. And his view is that the Tao's 自然 is never 自然 per se, but what he called culturalized 自然. And his word is 文化自然. And he talked a lot about how this kind of a so-called humanization of 自然 also can be found in Taoism as well.
Hmm.
So it's quite a very interesting arguments here.
I need to read more Liu Xiaogan. I do talk about him in the beginning of my book in unflattering terms, but that's probably because I haven't read enough of him. And I have this kind of pedantic habit when I write, I appear to be a lot more convinced of things than when I speak. And I don't know how to get that on the page. But yeah, I've not read enough Liu Xiaogan, I think. So what you said was interesting to me, and I'll have to look that up. Yeah, I guess he's the leading light in China today. Well, perhaps, yeah, on this topic, leading Chinese scholar on the topic of Dao and.
I mean, he's more like doing really close reading and collect all the historical comments, and he also put out like his own interpretations. He's not strictly a philosopher, but more like a commentator.
Yeah, literary.
Yeah.
Analysis. Yeah.
And Marx, I grew up in Communist China. Remember when we studied Marx's view about aesthetics? It's all, I don't know whether the Marx said, oh, what we are maybe influenced by already like a Russian interpretation of Marxism. And we always say, oh, for Marx, beauty is like in working.
Yeah.
So when you talk about beautiful body, like ancient Greek, those statues, and we'll say, oh, you see those muscles, why they're beautiful? Because they
We always connect it with labor, yeah.
Working class.
Yeah, I tried to do that.
And
a little bit, yeah.
noble people are ugly because they, so that kind of interpretation, but I don't think that's the direction you want to go. Right?
No, but I'm glad that you make the parallel. Yeah, I didn't give much thought to Soviets and post-Soviet sort of interpretations of aesthetics, because it's kind of a whole new field for me. But yeah, I did kind of allude to that, didn't I, when I said they've got muscles that you would have to get through working at them. I mean, and I can add to that actually that this was, and I write this in the article, that the ancient Greek gods actually, they show both what you might call the Attic peasants or the working peasants' ideal of beauty in humans and the aristocrats, because, and Marx actually mentions this in the sense that the aristocrats' conception of freedom was freedom of work. And so they justified slavery in terms of, well, we can be free this way. We're free to just think about stuff. Physical labor dirties the body, and it's not for us. That's what people who are being forced by material necessity to do stuff, they end up doing that. And actually, ancient Greek statues, they look so real and yet unreal. And one of the ways in which they do that is because they show the gods having these muscular bodies, but these muscular bodies are apparently completely superfluous. They don't need them because they never, you know, Zeus is just either sitting down or he's just posing. They're not in a struggle. I mean, there are actually some statues, some ancient Greek ones where they are statues, but also this is shown on the ancient Greek statues when you don't see the sinews and the nerves and the signs of wear and tear that all weightlifters or real physical laborers actually have. They take all those blemishes off them. And so you just see almost childlike muscle on these gods. And that's why they kind of look otherworldly and not real. It's a combination of working peasants' conception of freedom, muscles, and an aristocrat's conception of freedom. We don't need those muscles. We didn't actually have to work to get those muscles. It's just to make us look good, sort of. We're beyond muscles, sort of thing.
There are a few more people in the queue now. I believe we have Jan first. I don't know if we can get a microphone. Okay, that should do. Yeah.
That's for a talk. You said that there's some sort of Aristotle and Hegel, right? And there's some, yeah. And Aristotle said something about transcendentals as well, which Aquinas also took rather seriously. And he says that transcendentals, there are 6 of them: goodness, truth, beauty, and so on. And beauty seems to be more than truth and goodness, like combination of truth. If something is intelligible and it's good,
it's a moral ideal,
beautiful, right? So I don't know how that counters the Hegelian notion that truth is more than beauty.
Yeah, because beauty is more than truth with Aristotle.
Yeah.
And now you think, oh, but what about Hegel? And if Hegel's copying Aristotle, yeah. So I suppose he departs from Aristotle there. Yeah, I'm not going to say they agree about everything. Obviously, Hegel does add a lot. And yeah, I mean, for Aristotle, isn't it? Yes, beauty it's depicting a moral ideal. And for Hegel, yeah, art does have a primarily sort of moral task to perform. but it's also about unveiling and sort of releasing or expressing a kind of a truth, really. And I already said before that Hegel is explicitly not into mimesis, and that's Aristotle's thing, you know. But so, you know, they get pretty close without being the same, that's for sure.
Evening, sir. I've got a question about Marx. Marx is well known for his obsession with materialism.
Yeah.
Actually, he insists on the material basis of everything to the degree that he almost denies how beauty can ever be considered as commodity in his economic theories. My question is, how do you think his philosophical understanding of natural elements tie in with his economic theory? Because he considers natural elements as objects of art. And
Yeah.
does these two parts of his theories fit in, or are them compatible with each other?
Well, I'll pick up on what you said about there's been no place for beauty in Marx's doctrine or Marx's theory. And I would say that follows from, I mean, it is quite a popular strain of thought in Marxism, but it follows from what you might call older Marx studies, which I would, when I say older Marx, I mean Marx, the old man Marx, not the younger Marx studies, not the what they might call the humanist Marx. I might say more that it's Althusserian, this kind of economistic view of Marx, which I've never really subscribed to. I mean, I see Marx as a continuation of the early humanist writings, and then this later, it looks like kind of technological determinist writings from a certain light. There has to be a way of putting these together, because well, I mean, I don't think there was a Kantian turn. I mean, I don't think Marx ever had this revelation. And if he did, he should have written about it, because he really confused a lot of people without mentioning this revelation he's had. So now I think it's always inbuilt. A deep appreciation of aesthetic principles is inbuilt into Marx's conception of human freedom, which is absolutely essential if you want to understand Marx's theory of exploitation. I don't really understand how you can talk about exploitation without talking about freedom. And that's, you know, Capital is all about exploitation. Well, it's explaining exploitation, right? So it seems to me, if somebody is going to say, and they do, as I mentioned Althusser, we can have one without the other, I won't subscribe to that kind of reading. I think definitely he's shifted and developed, but I don't think Marx will have just said, oh, and I was simply wrong about all of this in the past. Even his doctoral thesis, I believe Marx carried on being interested in what he says there. That stuff about Epicurus, where people said, oh, he completely dropped all that. I think that kept running on in his theory. So yeah, I believe in this continuation. If you can't put these two together, what you might think of opposed ideas, if you can't put these two together, then so much the worse for Marx, really. Marx is just a bad theorist then, as far as it's better if we have them together.
Thank you, sir. Thank
you. Well, thank you. I hope I answered you. Some of us.
I think it's possible to squeeze in another question, potentially. If there's anything. I'll let the author linger for. Well, there is no question, and I suppose we can adjourn and maybe continue the conversation downstairs in a more informal capacity for those interested. But why don't we conclude at least with thanking our speaker once again. See you next time, I hope.
Oh yeah, I hadn't prepared for those questions, and I think, yeah, they did make me think.
Well,